The night is unremarkable. No storm cells pulse on radar. No emergency frequencies crackle with urgency. The air carries a quiet confidence of routine. Engines turning steadily. Instruments glowing softly. A charter flight doing what it has done countless times before. In 1977, this is how most accidents begin, without spectacle, without warning, without the audience knowing that margins already thinning. A Beechcraft Queen Air moves through the darkness. Twin-piston engines hold a steady rhythm, their sound absorbed by cold air and distance. The aircraft is neither new nor obsolete, solid, familiar, trusted. In this era, it represents capability, enough speed, enough range, enough reliability to meet the demands of charter work. It has carried executives, technicians, families. Tonight, it carries expectation, the quiet assumption that arrival is inevitable. Inside the cockpit, the world is small. Red and green instrument lights outline airspeed, altitude, heading. The outside view is limited, perhaps a faint horizon, perhaps none at all. Navigation is not automated. Position is confirmed through radio signals, charts folded and refolded. Mental calculations refined through habit. The system works until it doesn't, and when it doesn't, there's little time to debate. Charter flying in the 1970s lives in a gray space between airline structure and private freedom. There are rules, but enforcement varies. There are standards, but interpretation rests heavily on the crew. Weather briefings are shorter. Forecasts are less precise. The cockpit is quieter, no automated call-outs, no digital alerts. Just the pilot, the instruments, and experience filling the gaps. The Queen Air holds altitude. The engines remain synchronized. Nothing demands attention yet. That is what makes this moment dangerous. In aviation, danger often arrives not as an alarm, but as an absence, no cue strong enough to interrupt momentum. Outside, terrain slides beneath the aircraft unseen. Hills, valleys, obstacles that exist only as contour lines on a chart and numbers on an altimeter. In clear daylight, they would be obvious. At night, they're abstract. In marginal conditions, they become unforgiving. Radio transmissions are brief, procedural. Clearances acknowledged. Positions reported. There is no urgency in the controller's voice, no hint that anything is wrong. From the ground, the aircraft is just another blip, another routine movement in a sky filled with them. The cockpit workload is manageable. It always is, until one variable shifts. A heading adjustment, a descent initiated slightly early, a weather layer thicker than expected. None of these alone constitute danger. Together, they begin to align. The Queen Air was designed for pilots who understand its limits. Its performance is honest, but finite. Power margins shrink quickly at lower speeds. Instrument interpretation requires discipline, especially when visual references fade. There is no excess thrust to mask hesitation, no automation to quietly correct a drifting course. Time continues forward at its usual pace. The aircraft does not know it is approaching a boundary. It responds only to inputs: throttle, pitch, trim. Physics remains indifferent. Passengers, if any are awake, sense nothing unusual. The flight feels normal. The cabin hum is constant. The promise of arrival still holds. On the ground, the night remains still. In accident investigations, the opening moments are often the hardest to define, not because information is missing, but because nothing appears wrong. Investigators later search these minutes for subtle clues: a decision made slightly earlier than planned, a tolerance stretched just enough to matter. This flight will not end as planned. But hey, in this opening stretch of darkness and routine, there is no drama to announce that fact. Only a machine moving through only professionals doing a job, only a sequence quietly assembling itself, piece by piece. without intent. The Queen Air in 1977, aviation exists in transition. The jet age has matured at the airline level, but below it, beneath scheduled carriers and major hubs, charter and commuter operations still rely heavily on piston-powered aircraft. These flights occupy an essential space. They connect smaller cities, serve industries that require flexibility, and move people where airline routes do not reach. They also operate closer to the edge of regulation, oversight, and technological support. The Beechcraft Queen A is a product of that environment. Originally developed as an executive and utility aircraft, the Queen Air bridges two worlds. It offers twin-engine reliability, respectable range, and a cabin capable of carrying passengers in relative comfort, yet remains a pilot-intensive machine. There is no automation to absorb error. Performance depends on correct configuration, accurate navigation, and disciplined energy management. By the late 1970s, Queen A's are common in charter fleets. They are respected, not feared. Their accident record is not exceptional for the era, neither unusually poor nor notably exemplary. When accidents occur, they tend to follow familiar patterns: weather encounters, navigation errors, misjudged descents. These are not reckless aircraft. They are unforgiving ones. Charter operations at the time are shaped by variability. Unlike airlines, they do not operate under rigid schedules or standardized routes. Each flight is unique. Planning often happens quickly. Crews adapt to passenger needs, shifting destinations, and evolving weather. The expectation, unspoken but present, is that the flight will go unless a clear reason exists to cancel. That expectation matters. Regulatory oversight exists, but it is lighter than modern standards. Crew resource management is not yet formalized. Human factors as a discipline is still emerging. Investigations focus heavily on mechanical failure and procedural compliance, with less emphasis on cognitive load, fatigue, and decision bias. Pilots are expected to manage complexity largely on their own. Weather forecasting in 1977 is improving, but still limited. Satellite imagery is coarse. Updates are less frequent. Terminal forecasts can be outdated by the time an aircraft is airborne. In-flight weather avoidance relies on pilot reports, onboard radar, if equipped, and visual cues. At night, those cues diminish rapidly. Navigation is similarly constrained. VORs and NDBs define routes, but accuracy depends on signal quality, interpretation, and cross-checking. Position awareness is an active process, not a passive display. A small misinterpretation can persist undetected for minutes, sometimes longer. The Queen Air cockpit reflects this reality. Analog instruments dominate. There are no ground proximity warnings, no terrain displays. Altitude awareness is achieved through barometric settings, mental models, and constant vigilance. Descents are planned using experience and rule-of-thumb calculations. This is not negligence. It is normalcy. Crew training emphasizes aircraft handling, systems knowledge, and regulatory compliance. Less attention is given to how stress, expectation, and fatigue influence perception. When things go wrong, they often do so quietly, incrementally, without a clear moment when the flight transitions from safe to unsafe. The charter environment amplifies this risk. Passengers trust the operator. Operators trust their pilots. Pilots trust their judgment. Each layer assumes the others will catch any developing problem. Most of the time, that trust is justified. But accidents in this sector rarely stem from recklessness. They emerge from convergence. Routine decisions interacting with imperfect information, constrained by technology and shaped by pressure to complete the flight. By the time investigators examine the aftermath, they often find no single violation, no dramatic failure. Instead, they uncover a series of reasonable actions that, together, removed escape options one by one. The Queen A charter crash of 1977 belongs to this category. It unfolds within a system that is to understand how this flight moved toward its final outcome. The analysis must slow down, not to search for a single mistake, but to examine how several independent elements interacted, each logical on its own, each narrowing the margin. The aircraft. The Beechcraft Queen A is a study in balance. Twin-piston engines provide redundancy, but not excess. Performance is predictable, not forgiving. At typical charter weights, climb capability is adequate but limited. Any deviation, ice accumulation, improper power management, or drag from configuration reduces that margin quickly. Instrumentation is conventional. Airspeed, altitude, attitude, heading, engine gauges that require constant scanning. There is no system to warn of rising terrain. No automated voice to announce deviations. The aircraft will not intervene. It assumes the pilot remains ahead of it. At night or in instrument conditions, the Queen A demands discipline. Small pitch changes have meaningful consequences. Descents must be planned and monitored carefully. A misset altimeter or misunderstood clearance can persist unnoticed if cross-checking lapses, even briefly. Nothing about the aircraft is inherently unsafe, but it offers no protection from gradual error. The crew. Charter pilots of this era are often experienced, but experience is unevenly distributed. Hours may be accumulated across varied operations, aircraft types, and environments. Standardization is limited. Crew coordination, if more than one pilot is present, depends on personal habit rather than formal doctrine. Decision-making is shaped by expectation. The flight is planned to arrive. Weather has been reviewed. Nothing has yet contradicted that plan strongly enough to demand reconsideration. This mindset is not reckless. It is human. Fatigue is difficult to measure after the fact, but it is always considered. Charter schedules are irregular. Duty days can stretch. Night operations reduce sensory input and increase reliance on instruments. Cognitive workload rises as visual references disappear. Communication in the cockpit is likely minimal and professional. There is no evidence of distraction, no indication of conflict. That absence itself becomes relevant. Without challenge or interruption, assumptions persist. The environment. The environment does not announce its threat. Weather may be marginal rather than severe. Visibility reduced, but not zero. Cloud layers that appear manageable from above but obscure terrain below. Wind that subtly alters ground track. At night, terrain awareness becomes abstract. Hills and obstacles exist only as numbers. Descents that feel gradual can place the aircraft closer to the ground than intended, especially if position awareness is imperfect. If weather conditions are deteriorating, the change is incremental. No single moment forces a decision. Each minute looks similar to the last, until suddenly it does not. Systems and procedures. Navigation relies on ground-based aids. Signals are interpreted through needles and audio identifiers. Position fixes are estimates refined through repetition. Errors accumulate quietly. ATC provides clearances and information, but responsibility for terrain clearance rests with the crew unless under positive radar control with minimum vectoring altitudes. In many charter environments, that protection is limited or absent. Checklists exist, but they do not cover judgment. Procedures assume correct interpretation. When interpretation falters, procedures cannot compensate. None of these systems fail outright. They function as designed. The vulnerability lies in their interaction, how small deviations in one area amplify others. By the time all angles align, options are reduced. Altitude, position, and awareness converge into a narrow corridor. The aircraft continues to fly normally, responding faithfully to inputs. The turning point approaches not as a dramatic event, but as a condition, a moment when recovery would require recognition, time, and space, all three now in short supply. The transition from normal flight to accident is not marked by a single moment. It unfolds across minutes that, in isolation, appear unremarkable. The aircraft remains under control. Engines continue to produce power. No warning lights illuminate. There is no sudden mechanical failure to command attention. Instead, the threat develops quietly, shaped by position, altitude, and perception. As the Queen Air proceeds along its route, a descent is initiated, whether planned or adjusted in response to clearance, weather, or navigation. The change is modest. The aircraft's nose lowers slightly. Vertical speed increases within normal limits. Instruments confirm compliance. Nothing appears abnormal, but descent in darkness removes margin quickly. Without external visual reference, altitude becomes a number rather than a sensation. Terrain clearance depends entirely on accurate position awareness and correct interpretation of charts and procedures. If either is even slightly degraded, the aircraft can descend below safe altitude without immediate indication. Navigation cues remain consistent, too consistent. Radio signals continue to register. Headings hold steady. The aircraft is where the crew believes it should be. That belief matters more than reality. At this stage, the error chain is complete, though invisible. The aircraft is lower than intended. Terrain ahead rises gradually, not abruptly. There is no dramatic ridge or sudden obstacle to force recognition. The ground approaches on a shallow gradient, closing the distance silently. Cockpit workload increases subtly. Attention shifts between instruments. Small corrections are made, routine, precise. There is no urgency. The environment offers no contradiction strong enough to trigger doubt. The Queen A's performance remains unchanged. Airspeed is stable. Engine indications are normal. Control inputs produce expected responses. Nothing in the aircraft suggests danger. Outside, the night absorbs sound and depth. Clouds, haze, or darkness obscure the horizon. Visual cues that might have revealed proximity to terrain absent. The aircraft is effectively blind beyond its instruments. By the time the final seconds begin, recognition, if it occurs at all, comes too late. There is no room to climb aggressively. Power increase, pitch change, or configuration adjustment cannot overcome the closing distance in time. Physics asserts itself without emotion. The impact is sudden, definitive, and non-survivable. The aircraft strikes terrain under control, engines producing power, attitude consistent with flight. There is no evidence of evasive maneuvering sufficient to alter the outcome. Silence follows. In investigation terms, this sequence is classified not by chaos, but by continuity. The aircraft was flying as commanded until it could no longer do so. The system did not collapse. It functioned exactly as it was directed. This is a defining characteristic of controlled flight into terrain. The absence of apparent failure, the presence of normalcy up to the moment it ends. There is no mayday recorded, no warning transmitted. The accident does not announce itself in advance. It simply concludes a sequence that has been unfolding quietly for some time. For investigators, the challenge will not be determining what broke, but understanding how. The investigation begins in silence. There are no survivors to interview, no cockpit voice recorder to replay. In 1977, many charter aircraft do not carry flight data recorders. What remains is physical evidence, environmental data, and reconstruction through methodical elimination. The wreckage confirms what radar and impact signatures suggest. The aircraft was intact and under control. Engines show signs of power at impact. Control surfaces are consistent with normal flight. There is no indication of in-flight breakup, fire, or catastrophic mechanical failure. This narrows the field. Investigators map the debris path and examine impact angles. The shallow descent profile points away from loss of control. The aircraft did not stall. It did not spiral. It flew into terrain while still functioning as designed. Attention shifts to navigation and altitude management. Charts are reviewed. Minimum safe altitudes for the route are examined alongside weather conditions and time of flight. The terrain is not extreme, but it is unforgiving when visibility is limited. Night operations remove the last buffer that visual reference might provide. Weather data is reconstructed from station reports and pilot observations. Conditions are consistent with reduced visibility and obscured terrain. Not severe, but sufficient to demand strict adherence to altitude discipline. There is no evidence of sudden weather collapse, only gradual degradation. Investigators then turn to operational context. Charter pressure is considered not as an accusation, but as an environmental factor. The decision to continue the flight is examined against the information available at the time. Nothing stands out as a clear violation. The flight appears legal. That, too, becomes part of the finding. Human factors analysis in this era is understated. Language is careful, often indirect. Terms like misjudgment and loss of situational awareness appear without elaboration. The concept of cognitive overload is acknowledged, but not deeply explored. Still, the conclusion forms. The accident results from a descent below safe altitude in conditions of limited visibility, compounded by navigation uncertainty and the absence of terrain warning systems. No single error is isolated. Responsibility is distributed across planning, environment, and system limitations. The impact ripples outward quietly. For the operator, the loss is immediate and profound. Operations are reviewed. Procedures are scrutinized. Insurance, oversight, and internal standards tighten. The aircraft type itself is not grounded, but confidence is shaken. Within the broader aviation community, the accident joins a growing pattern. Similar events, different aircraft, similar circumstances begin to accumulate. Individually, they appear routine. Collectively, they reveal a systemic vulnerability. Investigations like this one contribute incrementally to change, not through dramatic reforms, but through accumulation. Each report adds weight to the argument that pilots need better tools, clearer altitude guidance, and improved situational awareness. The wreckage is eventually cleared. The site returns acquired. Official records close. But the questions remain, preserved in reports and training manuals, subtle, technical, and enduring. Accidents like this rarely reshape aviation overnight. They work more quietly, accumulating influence through repetition and pattern. The Queen Air charter crash of 1977 becomes one of many events that, taken together, expose a fundamental vulnerability in light and charter aviation, the reliance on human perception alone to maintain terrain separation in marginal conditions. In the years that follow, the industry begins to change, not in response to this accident alone, but because too many similar ones make denial untenable. Terrain awareness becomes a priority. Minimum altitude procedures are clarified. Instrument approach design improves, placing greater emphasis on obstacle clearance rather than navigational convenience. Pilots receive more structured training in decision-making, though the language remains technical rather than psychological. Technology advances slowly at first. Ground proximity warning systems, once reserved for large transport aircraft, begin to filter downward. Later, digital terrain databases and GPS fundamentally alter how pilots understand position and altitude. What was once abstract becomes visible, immediate, undeniable. Charter operations also evolve. Oversight tightens. Documentation increases. The expectation that a flight should proceed unless clearly unsafe gives way, gradually, to a culture where discontinuation is an acceptable outcome. This shift does not eliminate risk, but it redistributes it, providing more opportunities to stop the sequence before it becomes irreversible. The Queen A itself continues to fly for years afterward, in upgraded forms, with improved avionics and clearer procedures. The aircraft was never the villain. It was a product of its time, operating within a system that asked much of its pilots and offered limited protection in return. What endures is a lesson that normalcy is not safety, that a flight can be legal, routine, and professionally conducted, and still end in loss. The absence of alarms does not imply the absence of danger. Today, crews benefit from layers of defense built from the quiet accumulation of past mistakes. Altitude alerts sound. Terrain displays glow. Automation intervenes when humans hesitate. These systems do not remove responsibility, but they acknowledge human limits. The legacy of this accident is not found in memorials or headlines. It exists in procedures followed without question, in alerts that interrupt complacency, in descents arrested before they become final. At the crash site, the ground remains unchanged. The night still falls the same way it did in 1977. Aircraft pass overhead now with tools and knowledge their predecessors lacked. The lesson endures in that contrast. A margin once invisible is now marked, and because of that, many flights end as expected, quietly, uneventfully, without notice, exactly the way aviation is meant to work.